Welcome to night 22 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore inside the 18th century vampire panic that gripped rural New England. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. The night over New England did not arrive suddenly. It settled in gradually, as if it had been waiting patiently beyond the treetops, gathering itself in the spaces between hills and fields. The last light of the day would fade slowly, lingering along the edges of the sky, and then slipping away without ceremony. What remained was a calm darkness that did not feel dramatic, only wide and steady, like a familiar blanket drawn across the land. In the late 18th century, this part of the world was still shaped by distance. Roads existed, but they were narrow and uneven, often little more than worn paths pressed into earth by wagon wheels and the repeated steps of horses. Many of them curved naturally around groves of trees, followed the contours of streams, and disappeared behind hills where the ground grew softer and more difficult. Travelers moved carefully, not only because the land could be unpredictable, but because time itself felt different here. There was no urgency in the way days passed. The hours were not measured by clocks alone, but by the angle of the sun, by the shift of wind through the pines, and by the way frost formed on grass before dawn. Beyond the main roads, there were smaller trails that led toward isolated farms and scattered homes. These paths were quieter still. They were used by people who already knew where they were going, and who did not expect to meet anyone along the way. In many places, the forest pressed close, its branches stretching over the trail as if attempting to reclaim it. Leaves and needles softened the sound of footsteps. Even a cart passing through might seem muted, its wheels turning with a slow complaint against stones, its wooden frame creaking gently with each small dip in the ground. The landscape itself held a certain simplicity. There were fields where crops grew in careful rows, and open pastures where animals grazed with their heads lowered, moving without hurry. Stone walls divided properties, built from rocks gathered patiently over years, stacked one upon another until they formed lines that looked almost natural. These walls were not grand, but they endured. They were the work of hands that understood repetition, hands that knew how to build something lasting without expecting it to be beautiful. In the evening, when the last work of the day was finished, the fields seemed to exhale. The air cooled and the scent of soil became sharper. The grass darkened. Shadows stretched slowly across the ground, lengthening from trees and barns and fences. Somewhere far away, a bird might call once or twice before falling silent. Crickets began their steady rhythm, a sound that seemed less like noise and more like a gentle reminder that life continued even in stillness. The towns of rural New England were small, and even when they were busy, they rarely felt crowded. A cluster of houses might gather around a meeting house or a church, with a few shops, a tavern, perhaps a blacksmith's forge. But beyond that center, the land spread outward again. Farms sat at a distance from one another, separated by fields, by streams, by strips of woodland that had not yet been fully cleared. At night, the lights from these homes were faint. A candle behind a small window could be seen across a field like a quiet star, steady and unmoving. People who lived here became accustomed to such distances. They did not expect the constant presence of strangers. They recognized familiar footsteps, familiar voices, familiar shapes moving along the road. They knew the creak of their own gate, the sound of their own animals shifting in the barn. Even the wind seemed to have its own recognizable patterns. It moved through the trees in a way that could tell an attentive listener whether the night would bring rain or frost or nothing at all. The seasons shaped everything. In summer, the air could feel thick and warm, and the work was endless. The days began early, long before the sun had fully risen. and continued until evening shadows became too long to ignore. In autumn, the forests turned slowly into deep colors: rust, gold, muted red, and the harvest brought a quiet urgency that was practical rather than anxious. Winter, when it came, did not announce itself loudly. It arrived with colder nights first, with a thin skin of ice forming along the edges of water, with breath becoming visible in the morning air. Then the snow would fall, sometimes softly, sometimes in heavy storms that seemed to erase the world beyond the nearest trees. Winter nights were long, and in those months the distance between homes felt even greater. Roads became harder to travel. A simple trip could take hours, and the cold made everything slower. Yet the people were not surprised by this. They lived as though they had always known the winter would come, and they prepared for it with quiet diligence. Wood was stacked. Food was stored. Candles were made or saved. Warmth was treated as something valuable, something that needed to be protected. In the early spring, when the snow began to melt and the ground softened into mud, the landscape changed again. Streams swelled. The air carried the scent of damp earth. The roads became difficult, but there was also a sense of renewal in the way the world slowly opened. New growth appeared, subtle at first. Buds formed on branches. The first birds returned. The land, after months of silence, began to make sound again. Through all these seasons, life continued with a kind of steady rhythm. People rose in the morning, worked until they were tired, and returned to their homes as the light faded. They did not speak often of the future in grand terms. Their lives were shaped by the immediate needs of the day, by the weather, by the condition of their animals, by the health of their families. It was a practical existence, but not without moments of quiet reflection. In the evening, after chores were done, there was time to sit, to mend clothing, to sharpen tools, to read if one had books, or to listen to the wind outside the walls. Still, there were moments when even familiar landscapes could feel uncertain. A fog rolling in from a low field could blur the edges of things. Moonlight could transform ordinary objects into unfamiliar shapes. A fence line might appear like a row of shadows. A tree stump could seem like a figure from a distance until one came closer and saw it clearly. These were not moments of terror, but of quiet adjustment, reminders that the mind filled in details when the eyes could not. In the rural villages, the night was not something to fear, but something to respect. People understood that darkness limited what could be done. It required preparation and patience. A person who needed to travel at night would carry a lantern, the small flame protected from wind, the glass or metal casing warming slightly in the hand. The light from such a lantern did not push the darkness away completely. It created only a small circle of visibility, a gentle glow that moved with each step, leaving the rest of the world untouched. Even the stars felt different in this place. Without the bright glow of cities, the sky could become crowded with them, scattered across the darkness in countless numbers. On clear nights, the Milky Way could be seen like a pale ribbon. People might glance upward as they walked, not in wonder alone, but in familiarity. The sky was part of their world, as steady and reliable as the earth beneath their feet. And beneath that sky, the homes remained small points of warmth. A farmhouse might stand alone at the edge of a field, its roof dark, its walls pale in moonlight. Smoke might rise faintly from the chimney, drifting upward and dissolving into the night air. The barn nearby would sit heavy and quiet, its wooden beams holding the scent of hay and animals. A well might be visible near the house, a simple structure that reminded anyone passing of the work required just to gather water. From one home to another, the distance could feel vast. Yet those who lived here were not isolated in the way later generations might imagine. They belonged to a network of quiet familiarity. They attended the same church services. They traded goods and labor. They visited one another when weather allowed. They shared tools, shared meals, shared news. Their community was not built from constant contact, but from dependable presence. When someone walked down a road and saw another figure in the distance, the meeting was rarely hurried. People would slow, recognize one another, exchange a few words. Sometimes they spoke of practical matters, crops, livestock, repairs. Sometimes they spoke of weather, which was always relevant. Sometimes they spoke of family and of who had been unwell and who had recovered and who had not. These conversations were often brief, but they carried weight because there were fewer of them. In such a place, the past was never far away. Many families had arrived from Europe only a few generations earlier, bringing with them not only language and religion, but habits of thought. Some of these habits were obvious: ways of cooking, ways of building, ways of planting. Others were less visible, living quietly in the mind. They appeared in the small superstitions people carried without thinking, in the way certain signs were noticed, in the way unusual events were remembered. The older people in these towns sometimes spoke of the world they had come from, or of the stories their parents had told. These stories were not always shared with seriousness, but they were not dismissed either. They were part of the texture of life, like the sound of wind through bare branches. They might be mentioned during long winter evenings, when the fire was low and the outside world was silent. They might be recalled in the spring, when strange illnesses sometimes returned with the damp air. They might be remembered after a funeral, when grief made people more attentive to things they could not explain. And though the land of New England felt new in many ways, still being settled, still being shaped by farms and roads, it also felt ancient in its own quiet manner. The forests had been here long before the arrival of these towns. The rivers had carved their paths for centuries. The stones in the fields had been waiting beneath the soil long before anyone built walls from them. The land did not hurry and it did not forget. It simply remained. As the night deepened, the world seemed to narrow. The horizon became harder to see. The edges of the fields disappeared into darkness. The distant trees became one continuous shadow. The air cooled further, and the smell of smoke from chimneys drifted softly, mixing with the scent of earth and wood. Somewhere a dog might bark once, then fall quiet again as if remembering that the night was meant to be still. A traveler moving along the road might see the faint glow of a window ahead, and feel a small sense of relief, not because danger waited behind, but because warmth was always welcome. The sight of a home at night suggested rest and shelter, and a pause from the long stretch of distance. It suggested the presence of others, even if only a few, gathered inside with the door closed against the cold. And inside those homes, life continued in its most intimate form. The wide landscape of New England, with its forests and fields and scattered roads, always led back to the same simple spaces: rooms lit by candlelight, hearths glowing quietly, hands moving slowly through familiar tasks. It was there, within those walls, that the long nights were truly lived, and where the quiet weight of the world could be felt most clearly. The land outside remained vast and silent, but the warmth of the houses began to draw attention, like small islands of light waiting patiently in the darkness, inviting the story to drift closer. News traveled slowly, and in that slowness it changed. A story told in one town might reach another with softened edges, altered by memory and repetition. Sometimes it was not even clear where a piece of information had begun. It simply arrived, carried by a traveler, mentioned in passing at a market, whispered between neighbors who met along a road. There were no newspapers delivered daily to every home, no constant stream of information to fill the quiet. Instead, the silence itself created room for stories to settle and linger. This was a world where people listened closely because there was less to distract them. A small change in routine could be noticed. A house that remained dark longer than usual might draw quiet attention. A farm that seemed less tended could become the subject of gentle speculation. When someone fell ill, word might spread, not with excitement, but with a subdued awareness that sickness was part of life, and yet never fully ordinary. The land encouraged this attentiveness. It was not a place that could be ignored. The forests were vast, and though much had been cleared for farmland, the wilderness remained near. Trees stood thick in many places, and beyond them there were stretches of land where few people went. At night, these woods became darker, their depth difficult to measure. The wind moving through them could sound like distant water or like something breathing. But the people who lived near them were used to such sounds. They had grown up hearing them. The forest was not a stranger, it was simply part of the world, as constant as the sky. As the faint glimmer of candlelight reached across the threshold of a small wooden home, the world outside seemed to pause, acknowledging the quiet warmth that glowed from within. The door, simple and unadorned, swung gently on its hinges when opened, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the lingering coolness of the evening air. Inside, the space was modest, yet every corner felt intentional, shaped by hands that understood the rhythm of daily living. The floorboards creaked softly under careful steps, and the walls, though plain, seemed to absorb the warmth and the quiet, making the house feel like a gentle embrace. In one corner, a hearth held a small fire, its flame flickering steadily, casting light and shadow across the room in slow, dancing patterns. The warmth spread outward, touching the wooden beams above, the shelves lined with jars and small utensils, and the table set simply for supper. The air was tinged with the faint aroma of cooking, mingling with the smoke that rose lazily from the fire. Everything was contained within the room's gentle boundaries, yet it connected subtly to the wider world outside, as the flicker of light could be seen from the road, offering comfort to those returning home. Families moved within this space with careful purpose. A pair of hands might fold cloth over a small basket, smoothing edges with deliberate attention. Another might set down a wooden bowl, the soft thump of it against the table marking a rhythm that seemed to belong to the house itself. Even in silence, the presence of work suggested care, continuity, and a quiet attention to life's necessities. No movement was hurried, no gesture unnecessary. Every task, from sweeping the floor to tending the fire, was part of a measured flow, a pattern that the inhabitants had learned through repetition and gentle observation. The rooms held evidence of lives quietly observed. A small stack of folded linens rested near the bed, each piece carefully pressed and positioned. Simple tools leaned against the walls, polished from use and arranged so that they might be found without effort. Books or papers, if they existed, lay open or stacked, undisturbed by hurry. The glow of the candle softened every surface, blurring rough edges into a calm haze. Shadows stretched across corners, elongating slowly, moving in ways that were mesmerizing if one allowed the eyes to linger. Even in the darkened corners of these homes, there was a sense of order and familiarity. Nothing was hidden out of sight from necessity, and nothing was displayed for pride. Each object had its place, each item served a purpose, each space felt lived in yet unburdened. The presence of hands, eyes, and steady breathing gave life to the rooms, but the movement was never abrupt. Silence was valued, and when spoken, words were few and measured, carrying meaning in their restraint. The hearth itself became a quiet center of attention, more for its constant warmth than for its light. Firewood was added carefully, the crackle soft and unassuming, a subtle reminder of human presence and effort. Candles were positioned to give maximum light with minimal flame, their soft illumination reaching into corners that might otherwise remain shadowed. Occasionally the firelight would flicker, and the walls would appear to breathe in time with the flames, casting shadows that slid across furniture and floor in a slow, fluid motion. Through the small windows the outside world remained visible but muted. Moonlight painted gentle streaks across the floorboards, mingling with the candlelight and lending a faint silver hue to objects bathed in its glow. The trees and fields beyond the house became almost dreamlike, their forms suggested rather than detailed. The contrast between inside and outside was subtle, a quiet warmth and presence within, a soft, still expanse without. The house offered a sense of refuge, a place where attention could settle on simple textures and motions rather than the vastness of the open land. Every home seemed to carry its own personality, though the differences were quiet. Some had slightly higher ceilings, some wider hearths, some more shelves for tools and possessions. The distinctions were not marked by opulence, but by the choices made over years of daily living. Children, if present, moved quietly or were already resting, their small hands learning to mimic the careful routines of elders. Pets, when kept, lay curled near the fire or moved softly across the room, their presence adding to the rhythm of life without interruption. Evenings were long and the night stretched deliberately. There was no rush towards sleep, though sleep would eventually arrive, gently, almost unnoticed. The inhabitants paced themselves accordingly, attending first to the practical, preparing food, gathering water, tending animals, then to the quiet tasks that nurtured the household itself. Each gesture became part of an unspoken routine, a slow choreography that allowed life to continue without effortful thought, guided by habit and by the gentle flow of hours. The house and its contents seemed to carry the memory of countless evenings before. Every scratch in the floorboard, every darkened corner, every polished utensil, spoke of repetition and continuity. It was a place that knew its occupants as much as they knew it. The walls held the stories of past actions, quiet triumphs, small failures, and the ever-present insistence of life moving forward in its modest way. Time within these walls felt different. Longer, slower, and imbued with a tangible sense of presence that the larger, more expansive world could not provide. Even when the wind rose outside, rattling the shutters or stirring the branches near the windows, inside remained calm. The house absorbed the sounds, letting them become part of the night's gentle hum rather than disturbance. Lanterns and candles flickered in response to air currents, but their soft light remained constant, maintaining a sense of focus and warmth. In this space, observation was quiet, and attention rested lightly on tasks, objects, and the slow passage of time. Nightly rituals unfolded without demand or announcement. A broom swept the floor in arcs softened by care. A bowl of water might be poured slowly into a pitcher for the morning. Tools were cleaned, sharpened, or positioned just so. Even sewing, stitching, or patching garments became a form of meditation, a way to mark the hours with calm, steady action. The rhythm of these motions gave the home its heartbeat, faint but steady, in harmony with the wider night. Within each home there was a sense of continuity, a gentle reassurance that life went on. The people who dwelled there were aware of one another's presence, even when quiet and separate. The house itself became a container for memory, habit, and gentle care. And in that quiet, life, work, and observation blended seamlessly, creating a sense of peace that stretched far beyond the wooden walls, hinting at the connections that wove the scattered farms and families together. And as the night continued, the rooms remained illuminated softly, their warmth spreading slowly through the house. The hearth, the lanterns, the careful movements of hands, all of these worked together to hold the night gently in place. Outside, the dark landscape waited patiently, stretching its distances into shadowed hills and forests. The home remained an island of light and attention, the heart of daily life, offering calm, steady continuity that invited the mind to rest and the body to relax. The next motion of life, subtle yet persistent, might carry the attention outward once more toward illness, health, and the way the world intrudes gently upon daily routines, preparing the scene for what quietly follows in the days and nights ahead. Even as the hearths burned quietly within the homes, a softer, subtler rhythm could be observed in the rooms and streets of these small New England villages. Life persisted gently, yet it was tempered by the knowledge that the body, delicate and finite, could sometimes falter. Illness did not announce itself with grandeur or noise. It moved with slow and measured steps, weaving its presence among the homes and families in ways that could be noticed only through careful observation. A cough, a pale hand resting on a table, a chair left empty for the afternoon. Each gesture signaled a change, subtle but present, like a shadow passing over the sunlit floor. Those who were ill were tended to with quiet diligence. Family members adjusted the fire to bring warmth, laid additional blankets over shoulders, measured water carefully for washing, and offered food prepared with patience. The routines of the household were gently modified, slowing to match the pace of those who needed rest. Work continued, but with mindful attention, each step and motion considered for its impact on the fragile life within the home. Even in these moments there was no urgency, only a soft awareness of the world's continuing motion around them. The villagers themselves moved through these patterns with calm attention. Visits were occasional and purposeful, measured by the need to provide care rather than social expectation. One might carry a small bundle of herbs, another a bowl of broth, each act performed with a soft touch and a quiet gesture, as if the hands themselves understood the importance of gentleness. Even the air in the home seemed to respond, stilling around those seated by the fire, softening the edges of the room, making the presence of care tangible but unobtrusive. Outside, the streets and trails held a muted rhythm. Travelers and neighbors who passed by the homes would slow their steps when a door remained closed for longer than usual. Their awareness was not alarm but understanding, a recognition that life included moments of quiet pause and careful attention. Dogs might stir, sensing change in the household routines, but they too adjusted to the unspoken demands of these nights. The land remained constant, yet it observed with a quiet patience the delicate patterns of human presence within it. Seasons continued to shape the world as subtly as ever. Winter brought long nights, the cold air pressing against walls and windows, deepening the need for warmth within. Illness became even more present then as bodies slowed and the environment pressed against fragile health. Candlelight glimmered longer into the night, shadows stretching across floorboards as if to cradle those who rested. Snow muffled the usual sounds of travel, leaving the soft hiss of wind and the faint echo of distant trees as the primary soundtrack of the hours. The quiet rhythm of tending and observing persisted, measured by the slow pace of life and the gentle attention given to those who needed care. In spring, the land began to soften, and with it, movement became slightly easier. Streams swelled, grass grew, and the air carried the scent of damp earth. Yet the awareness of illness remained, like a soft undercurrent beneath daily routines. Windows were opened to bring fresh air, herbs were spread on sills and tables, and the motions of tending continued without fuss or urgency. Children who had rested indoors now peeked outside, curiosity balanced by gentle guidance, their small steps cautious but exploratory. Adults moved through the space with awareness, allowing the land's renewal to complement the care given to those inside. The village as a whole seemed to function with a slow, attentive grace. Though houses were scattered and distances sometimes long, the community felt connected through these quiet threads. Illness touched some homes, and yet the collective rhythm adapted, continuing gently from house to house. Meals were delivered with careful hands, tools were shared for minor repairs, small gestures of attention reached across fences and fields, linking homes together without disturbance or insistence. Each day passed in the same measured cadence, each night stretched like a slow river flowing through the lives of those who inhabited it. Inside the homes, the influence of illness shaped the routines, but never dictated fear. A blanket folded differently, a fire stoked slightly more, the cautious movement of a hand across a table. These small acts were enough to maintain balance. The quiet presence of another family member could bring reassurance without words. The flicker of candlelight across a hearth, a faint glow in a window, carried information and comfort. Illness was noted, tended, acknowledged, but never allowed to dominate the steady, slow passage of evening. Even in moments when multiple homes were touched by softened health, the nights maintained their rhythm. The darkened roads and silent fields carried no rush, no urgency, only the steady expectation that life continued in its deliberate way. The wind, rustling through trees and across fields, moved freely, yet seemed in harmony with the careful movements of those indoors. Each shadow held a softness, each sound was absorbed, and each home became a small anchor in a broader, patient landscape. Stories of health and frailty traveled quietly along the roads and trails. They were shared in measured tones during brief encounters, mentioned gently to neighbors, noted but not magnified. The way an ailment changed routines, how a family adjusted its pace, how a room was kept warmer, or how tasks were divided. These observations shaped communal knowledge without creating alarm. Each person's understanding of life and fragility intertwined with the physical and temporal space around them, creating a network of calm awareness. As night deepened further, the pattern of illness and care became part of the gentle backdrop of village life. Candles burned low in the corners of rooms, their soft illumination mingling with the last traces of firelight from the hearth. Movements slowed, breaths deepened, and the quiet weight of attention wrapped around those who were resting. Even as illness lingered, there was a sense of constancy, a reassurance born of repetition, of care, of the understanding that life moved forward gently, with soft steps and attentive hands. The houses themselves seemed to absorb this quiet vigilance. Walls, floors, and furniture became witnesses to the careful attention of those who lived within them. Shadows stretched long and slow, dancing across familiar objects, bringing a gentle, mesmerizing rhythm to the space. Each task, no matter how small, was part of a larger pattern of calm continuity. Life, even when touched by frailty, remained steady, held within the warmth and the light of the home, moving slowly with the land, the seasons and the night. Outside, the darkened fields and forested edges remained patient observers. The landscape held no judgment, no hurry. The wind moved gently over snow or grass, across roads and through trees, carrying with it a quiet acknowledgement of the delicate patterns within the village. Life and fragility, health and care, all coexisted without alarm, moving together in soft, measured cadence. And within that steady unfolding, the villagers continued, tending, observing, adjusting, never hurried, always present, as if the world itself had adopted the rhythm of their careful, deliberate attention. In this way the nights carried on, each household a quiet testament to attention and care. The presence of illness was recognized without intrusion, noted without fear, accommodated without fuss. The slow, patient rhythm of village life continued, a gentle backdrop that allowed each person to move in harmony with the world around them. From house to house, from hearth to window, from room to room, the unhurried continuity of life created a calm, enduring pattern that stretched across the night and into the soft hours of early dawn. The village itself seemed to take a quieter breath as evening deepened, the soft hush of night settling over fields, rooftops, and the winding lanes that connected them. At the heart of the small town, a chapel stood, simple in its architecture but attentive to the needs of those who came within. Its wooden frame, weathered by wind and snow, held together with care, and its small windows glimmered faintly as the last hints of daylight gave way to candlelight within. The path to the chapel, lined with uneven stones, was worn by many quiet steps, each carrying a weight of reflection rather than urgency. As the villagers approached, their movements slowed further, deliberate and unhurried, mindful of the space they were entering. Inside, the air was filled with the soft, warm glow of candles positioned at various corners, casting pools of light onto the worn floorboards and simple benches. Each flame seemed to move independently yet harmonized with the others, creating a delicate rhythm that spread across the room. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint, lingering aroma of oil from the candles, giving the chapel a sense of life without distraction. Shadows stretched lazily along the walls, elongating and fading as if in conversation with the flickering light. It was a place shaped more by quiet attention than by design, yet in its modesty, it offered a profound calm. The villagers moved gently among the benches and pews, heads lowered, hands folded or resting lightly on the wooden surfaces. Some paused to light a candle, fingers brushing the soft heat of the flame, watching as the wax slowly melted and dripped into delicate pools. Each action was measured, carrying with it a sense of reflection rather than ceremony, a slow ritual that connected the individual to the collective hum of quiet attention. The sounds were minimal, the soft scrape of feet across the floor, the gentle hiss of a flame, a low murmur of whispered words, barely perceptible, yet resonating through the small, sacred space. Outside the immediate circle of the chapel, the village's night seemed to participate in the same deliberate cadence. The wind pressed lightly against shutters and roof lines, moving with a softness that seemed to honor the contemplative presence inside. Trees, stripped of their leaves or standing heavy with foliage depending on the season, swayed with a gentle, rhythmic patience. Even the distant hills and streams beyond the village adopted a muted tone, echoing the subdued attentiveness that filled the sacred interior. Within the chapel, the act of prayer was slow and deliberate. Some knelt on simple cushions, the fabric worn from repeated use, hands resting softly upon laps or folded in quiet alignment. Others remained seated, gazing at small altars adorned with modest wooden crosses or icons, their eyes softened in reflection. The sound of a breath, steady and even, carried across the space as though it were part of the architecture itself, filling gaps and lingering in the corners where light met shadow. Time seemed suspended here, not in stasis, but in a measured unfolding, allowing each individual to find their own rhythm within the collective calm. The rituals of this space were neither loud nor performative. Each gesture was inward, marking a deliberate passage through the evening hours. Candles were tended with care, sometimes added to or rearranged, their light moving slowly across surfaces to illuminate familiar objects. A small book of prayers, a wooden pew, the faint dust motes floating in the lamplight. Each action was simple yet significant in its quiet intent, contributing to a layered tapestry of attention and calm that enveloped all present. The connection between the inhabitants and the chapel extended beyond physical attendance. Even those who remained at home were attuned to the rhythms within the sacred space. The faint glow of windows, the soft echo of a low murmur or whispered recitation, carried through the village lanes, suggesting a presence, a continuity of thought and care that spanned the distance between houses. The world outside, dark and still, seemed to mirror the measured, gentle motions inside, creating an overarching sense of unity that threaded through the quiet night. As the villagers moved through their individual devotions, there was a sense of temporal softness that allowed reflection to unfold naturally. The passing of shadows, the flicker of candlelight across worn surfaces, the subtle changes in temperature as evening deepened, all combined to produce a steady, unhurried environment in which thought and attention could drift freely. Even the act of closing one's eyes for prayer or meditation did not impose a demand but allowed the body and mind to follow the gentle cue of their own rhythm. The chapel itself became a repository for these quiet gestures. Walls absorbed the hush, floors remembered the rhythm of repeated steps, and every corner seemed to echo the collective attentiveness of countless nights. The soft light refracted off simple objects, drawing attention to textures and shapes rather than narrative or drama. Each element, candles, benches, worn wooden floors, participated in the calm, holding the space in a gentle embrace that encouraged the mind to rest, even if only for a moment in shared stillness. Outside, the evening deepened, and the natural world carried its own echo of the chapel's serenity. Wind brushed leaves softly, carrying with it the faint, consistent rustle of branches. The sky shifted slowly toward darker hues, a gradient of deepening blues and muted grays, while the occasional star shimmered faintly, unhurried in its appearance. The quiet streets connected the homes and the chapel, and the interplay of shadow and faint illumination marked the slow passage of hours. The balance between human presence and natural rhythm created a gentle cohesion, uniting the village's inhabitants in subtle communion without words. Through the chapel's small windows, the outdoor landscape appeared serene and contemplative. Moonlight pooled across rooftops and lawns, enhancing the gentle contours of familiar objects, softening edges and making the mundane appear quietly beautiful. The air, carrying scents of damp earth, wood smoke and distant herbs, wrapped itself around the village, blending with the atmosphere within the chapel. Together, the interior and exterior produced a unified sense of slow attentiveness, a shared consciousness of space, time, and presence. Even the act of leaving the chapel followed a similar gentle cadence. Feet traced familiar paths back to homes, hands lingered briefly on doors or walls, a soft acknowledgement of the world outside the sacred space. Candlelight from windows flickered as the night moved onward, and the distant sound of wind across fields or through trees complemented the inner rhythms of contemplation and prayer. There was continuity in this movement, a quiet thread linking action, observation, and reflection across the village, reinforcing a sense of calm and unhurried participation in the cycles of daily life. The chapel's presence, along with the measured movements of its visitors, created a backdrop that extended beyond the walls. Households nearby, the lanes connecting them, the distant woods and fields, all became part of the same steady, slow experience. Life, with its attention to care, thought, and ritual, unfolded gently, unforced, and without expectation. Each night, the chapel's light and quiet formed a subtle anchor, carrying the inhabitants and their neighbors through the hours with a sense of continuity, reflection, and calm presence. And as the soft hours continued, the village's collective attention remained centered on these slow, deliberate rhythms, bridging the interior spaces of home and chapel with the vast, still night beyond. It was a world in which movement and reflection intertwined, guiding the villagers and their surroundings into a unified, serene observance of life's quietest hours, opening the path toward the soft breathing and whispering trees that awaited beyond the chapel walls. As the last footsteps retreated from the chapel, the village seemed to exhale, releasing the gentle hush that had settled among its roofs and lanes. Beyond the buildings, the open fields and nearby woods awaited, holding the night in a calm embrace. Shadows stretched and blended across the landscape, softened by the silvery glow of moonlight that filtered through the thinning clouds. The air carried a quiet chill, but it was not harsh. It was the kind that wrapped around shoulders and moved with the rhythm of slow, deliberate breathing, as though the world itself paused to acknowledge the stillness. The forest edges, where trees leaned over paths with long, patient branches, whispered softly with the passage of wind. Leaves trembled, brushing against one another, creating a muted, continuous murmur that filled the space between darkness and light. The trunks of ancient oaks and pines stood in quiet rows, their bark rough and textured, holding the memory of countless nights and seasons. Moss clung to shaded bases, damp and soft, and the faint scent of earth mingled with the cool night air, offering a sensory depth that invited slow, attentive observation. Paths through the woods meandered naturally, sometimes narrowing, sometimes opening onto small clearings where the moonlight pooled in pale circles upon fallen leaves. Each step upon the soft earth produced only a faint, cushioned sound, barely noticeable, yet it reinforced the rhythm of the night. Stones and roots emerged gently from the ground, their forms softened by shadow, encouraging the traveler to move with measured care, to allow the body to adjust to the subtle irregularities of the terrain. In this deliberate pace, the woods offered a quiet meditation, a chance for the mind to follow the slow unfolding of shapes, textures, and light. Beyond the dense patches of trees, open fields stretched, rolling gently toward the horizon. Tall grasses swayed in the night wind, whispering their soft secrets to the darkness, and the faint silhouette of distant hills marked the boundary of human presence. Streams ran quietly, their waters reflecting the pale lunar glow, creating thin ribbons of silver across the land. Every sound, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant trickle of water, the faint brush of wind, was part of a cohesive backdrop, a gentle orchestration that guided attention without demand or urgency. Night creatures, small and unobtrusive, moved in accordance with the slow pulse of the woods. The occasional flutter of wings, the soft rustle of a hidden animal, became an unspoken accompaniment to the flowing air. The animal's movements were deliberate, instinctive, yet never abrupt, blending seamlessly into the larger tapestry of quiet life that extended across the fields and trees. Their presence added a subtle texture to the night, a reminder that the world beyond human dwellings was alive, attentive, and measured. In this space, the boundary between light and shadow remained fluid. Moonbeams penetrated the canopy in shifting patterns, illuminating patches of earth, the edges of stones, and the curve of low branches. Shadows, long and soft, stretched across the forest floor, blending with darkness in ways that encouraged the eye to linger without needing to define. The play of light and shade created an environment both familiar and gently mysterious, offering a subtle invitation to follow the path of observation, slowly, without hurry or expectation. The night air itself carried stories of previous days and the promise of quiet rest. Each gust seemed to sweep across the village and fields, moving over rooftops and chimneys, touching door frames and window panes, then slipping into the woods to brush over ferns and moss. It mingled with the faint aroma of damp earth, fallen leaves, and the lingering warmth of homes that still glowed in distant windows. Breathing in this air, one could feel a soft connection to both the human and natural worlds, a continuity that held across structures, forests, and fields alike. Within the woods, small clearings occasionally appeared, offering spaces where the land seemed to pause in stillness. Fallen logs, worn paths, and scattered stones created subtle patterns, forming microcosms of quiet observation. The texture of bark, the soft play of lichen, and the gentle incline of a hill were all elements that invited unhurried attention. Shadows stretched long, then contracted as clouds drifted across the moon, producing an ebb and flow of illumination that was soothing in its rhythm, encouraging the mind to follow without effort. Along the edges of the fields, the air carried the muted scent of herbs, grasses, and soil. The faint ripple of water in nearby streams added a subtle rhythm, punctuating the steady whisper of the trees. The gentle movement of night wind through the open spaces produced a soft, continuous soundscape, one that calmed the senses and allowed attention to drift freely from one detail to another. There was a sense of continuity, a slow unfolding of the natural environment, where nothing demanded immediate notice and every element contributed to the overall stillness. Occasionally, distant homes were visible through gaps in the trees, their warm lights hinting at the lives carried on inside. Chimneys sent up faint trails of smoke, curling and dispersing into the night air, merging seamlessly with the gentle movement of the wind. The sounds of the village were distant, softened by the intervening earth and foliage, carrying only faint traces of human presence into the surrounding fields and woods. This connection between human life and natural space reinforced the pervasive calm, a sense of rhythm and balance that threaded through every aspect of the night. The night deepened further, carrying with it an increasing softness. The moon rose higher, painting the landscape in subtle gradations of silver and gray. Shadows shifted, merging and parting in slow cycles. Every leaf, stone, and branch seemed to participate in a collective awareness, each movement deliberate yet imperceptible. The gentle interactions of air, earth, and living forms created a quiet harmony, where observation was effortless and attention could rest lightly, unburdened by thought or urgency. Even as darkness settled fully across the woods and fields, the environment retained its subtle vitality. The pathways remained gently marked by moonlight, the brush of wind, and the delicate interplay of shadow and texture. The world exhaled slowly, and every element, from the tiniest leaf to the farthest hill, moved with an inherent, patient rhythm. In this expansive, quiet space, the night itself seemed to guide the passage of time, offering a soft continuity that encouraged rest, reflection, and ease. As the gentle night continued, the observer could wander through fields and woods without direction, without hurry, enveloped in the slow pulse of natural life. The whispering leaves, the subtle play of moonlight, the rhythmic sway of grasses, and the distant, muted sounds of village homes all worked together to create a serene environment. It was a world held in balance, where every detail contributed to the gentle unfolding of the night, and where the mind could drift freely, carried along by the soft breath of the land and the steady cadence of the hours. As the night air settled firmly over fields and woods, a gentle shift began to mark the rhythm of human presence. The villagers who had wandered quietly or tended to the forest's edges, now returned to their homes and properties, carrying with them the soft sense of attentiveness instilled by the evening hours. Steps were slow, measured, and deliberate, each footfall on the worn paths leaving a muted impression upon the earth, as if the land itself paused to observe the careful return of its inhabitants. The final light of day had faded into dusk, leaving traces of pale orange and muted lavender across the horizon, a soft illumination that mingled with the flickering candlelight waiting within doors and windows. Within the yards and open spaces surrounding the houses, evening chores unfolded with a tranquil regularity. Livestock, accustomed to the daily rhythms, moved with gentle familiarity as they were guided into pens or stalls. The sound of soft hooves against straw, the low murmur of animals shifting their weight, and the subtle creak of gates closing combined into a gentle symphony of nightly preparation. Each motion was performed slowly, the villagers' hands steady as they fed and watered, swept, or arranged the remaining tools of the day. No hurry pressed upon them, and no loud commands disturbed the air. Instead, the world seemed attuned to their deliberate cadence. Garden plots and small orchards received similar care, with attention given to plants and soil before night fully settled. Herbs were gathered and laid upon shelves, roots gently brushed of earth, and vegetables moved with careful hands into storage for later use. The movements themselves created a rhythmic pattern, a kind of quiet dance that filled the spaces between buildings and trees with measured energy. Fences were checked, gates closed with soft thuds, and water from nearby wells carried steadily, poured with the same attentive deliberation that marked all evening routines. Each chore, though simple, contributed to a pervasive sense of calm continuity, linking the land to the lives that depended upon it. The interplay of light and shadow during these hours lent a particular stillness to the work. The waning sun sent soft streaks across fields and rooftops, catching the tops of fences and the curves of garden beds in muted gold. Candlelight from windows spilled onto paths and doorsteps, joining the last traces of sunlight in a gentle, overlapping illumination. Shadows lengthened and softened as the day's brilliance waned, wrapping the village in layers of delicate contrast that guided eyes and thoughts in a slow, drifting focus. Each window became a small beacon, a warm mark of habitation in the embracing darkness. Sounds of the evening were similarly tempered. The faint shuffle of feet on dirt paths, the rustle of leaves in the soft breeze, the quiet clink of tools or buckets, and the low murmur of conversation blended into a calm, continuous background. Animals added their subtle notes: a sheep's soft bleat, a chicken's settling cluck, the low, gentle grunt of a pig nestling into straw. These sounds interwove naturally, creating an unhurried soundtrack that accompanied the final movements of the day. Nothing was abrupt. Each tone and rhythm seemed to flow effortlessly, reinforcing the sense of an ordered, careful transition from light to night. The human presence, moving with quiet deliberation, reflected the larger rhythms of the natural world observed earlier. Streams of moonlight and cooling evening air complemented the slow gestures of work, and the surrounding landscape seemed to participate in the careful attention offered by the villagers. Trees and hedges, still illuminated by the remaining amber of sunset or the gentle glow of lamps, framed each movement, adding depth and texture to the unfolding scenes. Even the smallest gestures, straightening a broom, closing a gate, placing a lantern upon a threshold, took on significance when observed in the context of the calm, deliberate evening. Children, whose daytime activities had left them restless, moved in smaller, more deliberate patterns. They helped with minor tasks, carrying light bundles or watering small plants, their attention guided by quiet instruction rather than urgency. Their movements mirrored the adult's rhythm, measured, aware, unhurried. The natural curiosity of youth was gently tempered by the soft pace of the night, allowing observation and participation to occur without agitation, fostering a sense of serene involvement within the communal flow of life. The play of light across various surfaces created a gentle visual tapestry. Window panes caught the flicker of candles, sending faint glimmers onto nearby walls or paths. Smooth wooden beams and stone surfaces reflected subtle illumination, emphasizing textures without startling the eye. Shadows, long and soft, stretched across yards, over garden rows, and beneath trees, shifting imperceptibly as candle flames swayed or clouds passed before the rising moon. Each element contributed to a cohesive, calm environment, reinforcing the gentle continuity of evening routines. Tasks concluded naturally and without abruptness. Gates rested quietly, tools lay in their designated places, and animals settled into familiar patterns of rest. The transition from active labor to observation was seamless. Hands, once engaged in purposeful motion, now lingered lightly on doorframes, benches, or fence posts, feeling the cool evening air or the soft warmth of residual sun upon surfaces. This gentle shift mirrored the broader world outside, where winds whispered through branches and distant hills rested beneath the night sky, undisturbed and patient. Inside the homes, the soft light from candles and hearths continued to extend a sense of calm. Each flicker illuminated simple objects: a bowl, a wooden stool, a folded cloth. The muted glow transformed familiar surroundings, drawing attention to textures, contours, and the interplay of light and shadow. Each element of domesticity became part of a larger, unhurried pattern, blending seamlessly with the rhythms of the external chores, the quiet movements across yards, and the distant trees in open fields. The effect was a pervasive calm that connected the indoor and outdoor spaces through a shared, gentle awareness. As night advanced, the overall soundscape shifted subtly. The stronger noises of daylight work had faded, replaced by whispers of wind, distant calls of animals, and the soft hum of household presence. Every action, no matter how small, contributed to the ambient sense of tranquility, whether a door creaked softly, a bucket was placed on the ground, or a candle's flame wavered in a gentle draft. The village's patterns were slow and deliberate, each chore folding naturally into the next, each movement bridging the transition from day to night in a seamless cadence. The harmony of light, sound, and action created a balanced environment. Paths, yards, and fields carried the soft imprint of human attention, while shadows and moonlight marked the space with quiet observation. The wind, moving through trees and over open land, served as a companion to the villagers' activities, connecting each chore to the larger rhythm of the natural world. Within this interweaving of human care and environmental presence, the night unfolded at its own measured pace, offering space for reflection, calm, and gentle awareness. Even as the final tasks reached completion, the night remained expansive and undisturbed. Gates closed, animals settled, tools rested, and human presence receded softly toward the warmth of homes. Candles continued their slow flicker, casting muted shadows across doorways and paths, while the moon rose higher to illuminate yards and fields in soft silver tones. The interplay of light, sound, and motion persisted, creating an environment that was both alive and restful, a seamless transition into the deeper calm of approaching hours. The deliberate pace of evening chores, combined with the gentle dispersal of light across the village, framed the night in quiet reassurance. Each movement, each sound, and each shadow contributed to a rhythm that could be followed effortlessly, without attention or effort. Life, observation, and care intertwined seamlessly with the natural world, guiding the village toward an unhurried and sustained tranquility, and opening the space for the subtle, glowing windows that would soon mark the next layer of evening observation. As dusk gave way to night, the village settled into a gentle rhythm where the boundaries between inside and outside became softly defined by light. From the warm interiors of houses, a faint glow extended outward through windows, spilling onto narrow pathways and the edges of thatched roofs. The light, tender and uneven, shifted with the movement of hands, the gentle sway of curtains and the flicker of candles. Each window offered a glimpse of stillness, a hearth's quiet warmth, a kettle resting atop a stove or a table set with care. The rooms themselves seemed to breathe slowly, the air inside carrying the subtle scents of wood smoke, fading herbs, and the lingering aroma of evening meals. In one home, a candle's flame trembled slightly as it illuminated the gentle curves of furniture, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor and against the walls. The movement of hands tending to small tasks, a chair pulled closer to the hearth, a folded cloth smoothed upon a table, created tiny shifts in light and shadow. Across the village, similar scenes played out in parallel. Soft gestures, careful motions, each one unhurried, deliberate, and imbued with a quiet attentiveness that mirrored the stillness outside. The effect was a gentle chorus of luminous pockets, a series of intimate worlds connected by the overarching calm of night. The play between the interior lights and the darkening outdoors was subtle and continuous. Moonlight glimmered faintly across rooftops and cobblestones, mingling with candle glow to create a layered landscape of warmth and cool silver. Shadows moved slowly, merging and separating as flames flickered and clouds drifted across the sky. The village appeared as a patchwork of illumination, each room a soft note in a larger, soothing harmony that extended from the interior hearths to the surrounding fields and woods. Nothing intruded. The visual tapestry encouraged the eye to wander gently, to linger without effort, and to rest upon forms without analysis or expectation. Inside, small routines continued with measured care. Someone adjusted the wick of a lamp, allowing a steady glow to spread across a wooden counter. A cloth was folded, a pan checked for the last warmth of a meal, and the gentle tick of a clock or the slow drip of a kettle punctuated the quiet. Each sound, each subtle motion, was enveloped by the overarching calm, drawing attention to the tactile, luminous world inside. The atmosphere held the mind lightly, neither demanding focus nor carrying urgency, permitting the senses to drift freely over surfaces, shapes, and gentle movements. Children moved slowly within the confines of their homes, following soft instructions or tending to minor tasks. Their presence added faint, measured motion to the rooms. A toy set aside, a book rested upon a table, the quiet sweep of a broom across wooden floorboards. Even their movements, while noticeable, blended into the stillness. Nothing broke the continuity, and every action reinforced the rhythm of evening calm. The warmth of light seemed to accentuate the textures of the interior, from the smooth curve of a windowsill to the rough grain of furniture, each detail inviting unhurried observation. Curtains swayed with the faintest drafts, letting in whispers of night air that carried scents from the outside fields and woods. The mingling of interior warmth with exterior coolness created subtle patterns on walls and floors, shadows softening and stretching, forming gentle shapes that shifted almost imperceptibly. The eyes could wander across these scenes without effort, absorbing the contours of space and light as they drifted from one illuminated patch to the next. In this gradual exploration, the village seemed to exist in a slow, unfolding present, neither past nor future intruding, only the steady, quiet pulse of evening. Windows not only framed light but also acted as portals to the deeper calm of the surrounding night. Through glass panes, the faint outlines of distant trees, hedgerows, or rooftops appeared softened by shadow, their forms barely distinct under moonlight. Occasionally, a breeze would ripple across the glass, producing subtle reflections that danced alongside the interior glow. The combined effect created a layered perception. The comforting warmth of interior space intertwined with the vast, serene night outside, and the mind could traverse both effortlessly, guided by subtle contrasts of light and shade. Throughout the village, patterns of small domestic motion were echoed across multiple homes, creating a chorus of human presence that remained soft and unobtrusive. A cup placed gently upon a table, a lantern shifted slightly upon a shelf, a folded garment laid aside, all movements performed with minimal sound and deliberate calm. The cumulative impression was one of a community in quiet coordination, each inhabitant contributing to the evening's gentle cadence without drawing attention or urgency. The village as a whole seemed to breathe in harmony with its smallest actions, a living, quiet organism defined by the interplay of light, shadow, and soft human care. From one window to the next, a variety of textures emerged. The smooth, pale glow of candlelight contrasted with the darker, worn surfaces of walls, floors, and furnishings. Subtle variations in color and shadow provided visual interest without demand, allowing the eyes to rest lightly on shapes and planes. The slow rhythm of movements inside, the adjustment of a chair, the folding of a cloth, the passing of hands over familiar objects, echoed the rhythm established outside in the evening chores, reinforcing a pervasive calm that linked domestic interiors to the wider, quiet village. Even as the night deepened, interiors retained a quiet, gentle activity. Lamps continued to flicker, casting warm light onto surfaces and creating slow, shifting shadows. The faint sounds of domestic motion persisted. A soft clink of utensils, the gentle sigh of a door, the murmur of a hearth settling into warmth. Each detail unfolded at its own pace, without urgency, drawing attention in a soft, enveloping manner. The world inside these homes mirrored the expansive stillness beyond, the calm of moonlit fields and whispering woods, integrating human presence into the ongoing rhythm of night. The transition from the outdoor chores to interior routines was seamless, a gentle handoff of responsibility and attention. What had been performed in the open air, feeding animals, closing gates, tidying tools, now found reflection indoors in the quiet gestures of domestic care. The light spilling from windows acted as a soft marker, guiding eyes, shaping movement, and connecting one space to another. Each illuminated room became both a sanctuary and a continuation of the village's careful, unhurried pattern, where observation could occur freely and the mind could follow the gentle flow without effort. By the time the deeper darkness of night took hold, the village had become a constellation of glowing windows, each a small island of warmth in the surrounding cool. Candle flames flickered against the panes, casting fluid shadows across walls and streets. The interplay of interior light and exterior night created a slow, mesmerizing rhythm, encouraging the observer to linger with each scene, to let attention soften, and to drift lightly through space. In this quiet interplay, the village seemed suspended between the living warmth of interiors and the calm expanse of the night, poised between activity and rest. The continuous pattern of light, shadow, and gentle domestic action extended into the night without interruption. The small gestures of inhabitants, the placement of a chair, the adjustment of a candle, the folding of cloths, served as a quiet accompaniment to the larger calm of the village and surrounding lands. Each window, glowing softly, marked a point of presence and care, weaving a subtle connection between the interior warmth and the darkness beyond. The eye could move slowly across the village, resting on these luminous points, following the steady, gentle rhythm without exertion or concern, fully immersed in the unfolding calm. As the village night matured, the lighted windows became markers of continuity, linking one dwelling to the next, connecting human activity to the enduring pulse of the natural world. Observers could trace the flow of movement, the subtle gestures, and the warmth of interior light, allowing the mind to rest within the gentle ebb and flow of scenes. The entire landscape, interior and exterior, light and shadow, motion and stillness, formed a soft, cohesive rhythm, bridging the quietness of evening chores with the more secluded tranquility that would follow along lantern-lit paths. The village streets, now emptied of daytime activity, stretched quietly under the soft glow of lanterns that lined narrow pathways and tucked corners. Each light, suspended in iron frames or set carefully upon posts, emitted a gentle amber hue that pooled upon cobblestones and the uneven surfaces of worn paths. The air was cool and steady, carrying faint scents of evening herbs, damp earth, and wood smoke from homes that still held a lingering warmth. Shadows from the lanterns extended slowly across walls and rooftops, shifting imperceptibly as the faintest breezes stirred tree branches or passed through narrow alleys. The streets themselves seemed to breathe, each curve and junction a measured note in the night's gentle rhythm. Stone walls and timbered houses framed the narrow lanes with quiet dignity, their textures softened by darkness and the subtle illumination of lantern light. The bricks, pocked and worn by countless years, caught the glow in uneven patches, emphasizing small crevices, ledges and arches without drawing attention. Doorways and thresholds were marked by faint flickers, occasionally interrupted by a curtain moving in the breeze or the subtle reflection of a distant window. The village, though empty of bustling activity, retained a sense of presence, as if the structures themselves remembered the day's motions and now offered a gentle witness to the unfolding night. Lantern light pooled at intersections, guiding the eye and tracing the meandering lines of cobbled lanes. Each step along these paths, should someone traverse them, would have been muted, the sound softened by the cool evening air and the gentle cushion of moss between stones. Leaves, dislodged by subtle gusts, drifted across the ground in slow, meandering arcs, momentarily catching light before settling into the soft darkness beyond. Even the smallest objects, a stray bucket, a coiled rope, a low stone wall, took on a gentle prominence, illuminated enough to be noticed but never demanding attention, forming part of the evening's continuous calm. The atmosphere was unhurried, a slow unfolding of light, shadow, and space. Windows continued to cast faint glows onto the streets, interweaving with the lanterns to create a soft tapestry of illumination. The village's corners, alleys, and open courtyards each held pockets of warmth, the amber and silver light mingling to form a subtle gradient across the surfaces of walls, trees, and paving. In the quiet, the eye could wander effortlessly, moving from one lantern's glow to the next, tracing the meandering paths as if following a gentle, invisible thread woven through the village. Wind whispered softly through narrow lanes, brushing against timbered walls and the eaves of roofs. It carried the faint rustle of leaves and the distant sound of settling animals, blending seamlessly with the hush of empty streets. Every movement, natural or incidental, was measured and deliberate, each contributing to the pervasive calm that defined this hour. The combination of ambient sound, lantern light, and the slow flow of air created a space where attention could drift freely, where the mind could rest without anticipation or interruption, following the contours of shadow and illumination with gentle ease. In the courtyards and open spaces between houses, lantern light revealed subtle patterns of life paused. Stone wells reflected the amber glow, their surfaces smooth and quiet. Low fences cast elongated shadows that stretched and softened as the flames flickered. Even discarded tools or bundles of firewood rested within this light, rendered with quiet dignity by its warmth. Every element seemed to exist in harmonious balance with the surroundings, contributing to the village's sense of calm continuity and gentle order. The streets themselves curved and folded with a quiet elegance, each turn offering new arrangements of light and dark, inviting the eye to linger without urgency. Narrow passages led between buildings, over small bridges, and past trees whose leaves caught the lantern glow in delicate patterns. Each path suggested a slow, uninterrupted journey, where one could move without haste and where every step would be cushioned by the soft hush of night. The interplay of cobblestones, light, and shadow created an environment that was both tactile and visual, inviting quiet observation and gentle mental drifting. Occasionally, the soft flicker of lanterns would reveal the glimmer of distant rooftops, the curve of a wooden beam, or the smooth texture of a stone wall. These small visual markers allowed the mind to wander naturally, tracing lines and surfaces, following the flow of light across walls and paths. The consistency of lantern placement and the rhythm of their glow created a subtle choreography for the eyes to follow, a measured, calming movement that guided attention without effort or expectation. The quiet streets also carried the faint sense of life beyond the immediate view. The soft flicker of hearths through curtained windows hinted at the presence of humans, their evening routines extending quietly into interiors. The ambient warmth of these homes, filtered through glass and timber, created a sense of connection between interior and exterior, further reinforcing the calm unity of village life at night. The lantern-lit streets acted as conduits between these luminous points, providing visual and spatial continuity that eased the observer's journey from one point to another. Shadows lengthened gently across courtyards and doorways, mingling with patches of light to form subtle textures on stone and earth. A stray cat, moving with slow deliberation, traced a careful path through the lanes, its steps muted against the cobblestones, the soft rustle of fur barely audible. Leaves and small branches occasionally moved with the wind, adding minor, unhurried motion to the still streets. Each tiny shift in the environment contributed to the perception of a living, breathing village, present yet deeply quiet, enveloped in the soft glow of lanterns and window light. The visual landscape extended to the horizon of rooftops and the distant tree line, where lanterns marked the periphery of human habitation, fading gradually into the encompassing dark. The edges of the village were softened by the dimming light, structures dissolving gently into shadow, leaving the sense of night's continuity uninterrupted. Observers could drift from one illuminated path to the next, from a glowing window to a lone lantern, moving fluidly through the village without urgency, guided solely by the slow unfolding of soft illumination and shadowed space. Through these streets, the experience of night was both intimate and expansive. Lanterns punctuated space, delineating paths and courtyards, while shadows provided depth and texture. The interplay between points of light and surrounding darkness offered gentle movement for the eye, inviting slow exploration, calm awareness, and unhurried attention. Each street, each corner, each softly illuminated threshold became part of a quiet narrative, linking the glowing interiors of homes with the broader nocturnal environment, and bridging human presence with the encompassing stillness. As the night deepened further, the lantern-lit streets remained a measured, continuous environment, their gentle illumination a guide through the quiet village. The subtle flickers, the soft shadows, and the occasional ripple of wind through narrow lanes created a cohesive, calming rhythm. Every curve of the path, every glimmer from a distant window, contributed to an overarching sense of serenity, preparing the mind for the next layer of the night. Solitary observers tracing their way through these same paths and hidden corners, quietly attending to the village in its slumbering state. The streets, quiet and softly illuminated by the lanterns, now held traces of presence in their gentle folds. Here and there, a figure moved with measured care, gliding slowly across cobblestones, their steps cushioned and unhurried. A night watcher, leaning on the steady rhythm of habit, traced familiar paths from one corner to the next, pausing briefly to observe a door, the faint glimmer of a window, or the subtle movement of curtains in the breeze. Each gesture was deliberate yet understated, a quiet acknowledgement of the village's continued heartbeat, almost invisible, yet undeniably woven into the night. In other corners, more fleeting forms appeared. A cat slinked across low walls, its fur catching the soft glow of a lantern, paws barely stirring the dust of the lanes. Occasionally, a dog shifted near a gate, its quiet sniffing a gentle accompaniment to the stillness. Every movement was slow and considered, a delicate dance in harmony with the calm of empty streets, leaving the observer with the impression of life balanced and present without intrusion. The village, while mostly at rest, had this subtle vigilance, a soft awareness that extended through shadows and light alike. The watchers' paths traced soft arcs through alleys and open squares. Their eyes, calm and attentive, swept over each surface with quiet care, noting nothing for the sake of record, merely acknowledging the space and its forms. Doors were checked, hinges barely creaking in response to the gentle pressure of hands. A gate was nudged into place, settling into its frame with a muted sigh. Each movement was performed with slow precision, blending into the ambient rhythms of lantern flicker, drifting leaves, and faint echoes of distant, slumbering animals. The night embraced these figures, holding their presence lightly, allowing them to exist without urgency or weight. The soft illumination of the lanterns and windows guided the watchers along their familiar routes, casting gentle pools of light onto the textured surfaces of walls, steps, and pavement. The interplay between shadow and amber glow created a layered, flowing environment. Every corner offered subtle variations, a quiet dance between dark and light, movement and stillness. As they passed, the figures became part of this rhythm, their presence acknowledged by the gentle sway of trees, the flicker of candlelight through curtained windows, and the slow, steady pattern of the night itself. Even the smallest details were observed in this hushed world. A door handle, cool and smooth under a careful hand. A loose shutter, nudged into place with minimal sound. A single lantern, slightly tilted, readjusted with a tender touch. The tactile engagement of each watcher with their surroundings reinforced a subtle connection between the human presence and the larger village, drawing together built environment and nocturnal life in quiet cohesion. Every gesture was absorbed into the soft unfolding of night, neither remarkable nor urgent, only gently real and perceptible. As watchers moved through narrower lanes, shadows deepened and stretched in slow arcs, mingling with the lantern light. Walls, timbers, and low fences were softly outlined, their textures accentuated by the layered illumination. The watchers' movements caused slight shifts in these shadows, momentary adjustments in the visual field that guided the observer's gaze gently along streets and intersections. No sudden contrasts appeared, only the slow, deliberate modulation of form and light, a visual lull that encouraged the mind to soften and drift alongside the measured motions of these solitary figures. The village's quiet guardians and night wanderers were largely unseen from afar, their presence a subtle thread in the broader tapestry of the nocturnal landscape. Occasionally, a hand brushing against a door frame or the shadow of a figure passing a wall would reveal them briefly, a transient punctuation in the otherwise continuous calm. Their movement followed the contours of the streets, through open squares and narrow alleys, maintaining the delicate balance of activity and stillness that defined this hour. Every passage was deliberate, each step resonant with unspoken care, forming a slow choreography invisible to those who might not notice. The interaction between watchers and the environment was gentle and reciprocal. As they adjusted doors, checked thresholds, or passed beneath lanterns, the village responded with shifting light and sound. Curtains fluttering, candle flames catching a draft, distant animals stirring faintly in the yards. Each response was soft and unremarkable, reinforcing the seamless integration of human presence into the broader nocturnal rhythm. Observation became participation, and participation became a natural extension of the village's quiet life, folding into its textures, sounds, and shifting shadows. Even as the watchers traced their paths, the stillness of the night remained dominant. Movement was minimal, deliberate, and harmonized with the lantern-lit streets and the cool darkness beyond. The air carried faint, consistent scents, damp soil, the smoke of distant hearths, and the subtle fragrance of herbs left to dry in windowsills. Sounds, too, were measured, a soft scrape of boots on stone, the subtle clink of a latch, the whispered movement of foliage. These details, layered into the calm, lent depth to the scene without urgency, allowing attention to rest lightly and to drift easily through the unfolding nocturnal tableau. Some watchers paused for longer moments, leaning lightly against a doorway or observing a faintly flickering lantern, their eyes sweeping slowly over familiar surfaces. The quiet and continuous nature of these observations invited the mind to wander, to trace lines and forms, to notice textures without expectation. Every flicker of light, every slow shadow, every minimal movement reinforced the pervasive calm, a steady pulse beneath the gentle hush of the village night. Here, stillness and quiet activity were seamlessly intertwined, creating a sense of presence that was both tangible and unobtrusive. The streets themselves, empty yet filled with these measured presences, formed an environment of soft continuity. Each watcher contributed to the subtle tapestry of the village, moving slowly through alleys, past lanterns, and beneath the watchful glow of distant windows. The paths connected homes, courtyards, and corners, guiding eyes from one small illumination to another, from one gentle movement to the next. The observer, floating through this scene, might notice the soft interplay of shadow and light, the faint cadence of steps, and the quiet acknowledgement of human presence without urgency or expectation. In this quiet, attentive world, night's presence was not merely the absence of day but a carefully balanced space of gentle awareness. The watchers moved through it as if brushing against the very fabric of calm, their subtle actions extending the rhythm established by interiors, windows, and lanterns. Their paths and observations linked the heart of the village with its quieter edges, preparing the eye and the mind to drift beyond, to the expansive, moonlit fields that lay at the village's periphery, where night could stretch with unhurried breath. The slow, deliberate movement of these figures, intertwined with soft illumination, quiet shadows, and minimal sound, created a soothing continuum. The village existed as a living, breathing organism, measured and patient, each observer's passage another note in the evening's ongoing lullaby. One could drift alongside them, tracing their arcs, following the gentle glow, and absorbing the calm cadence of the night. Every moment remained open, unhurried, leaving the mind to wander without direction or expectation, fully immersed in the measured heartbeat of the sleeping village. Beyond the last lantern-lit street, where the village had slowly receded into soft shadows, the field stretched outward under the gentle gaze of the moon. Each blade of grass, tipped with dew, shimmered faintly in silver light, and small paths, often trodden by livestock or wandering villagers, wound slowly through the expanse, tracing subtle curves across the quiet earth. The horizon was unbroken, distant trees softened by moonlight, their forms merging with the faint shimmer of nocturnal mist that hovered just above the soil. There was a profound stillness here, a sense of openness that invited the eye to roam and the mind to release, following the contours of land and the gentle rise and fall of undulating terrain. Soft winds moved through the fields, stirring the tops of grasses, coaxing faint rustles that harmonized with the occasional whisper of a distant brook or the quiet cry of a night bird. These sounds were neither intrusive nor urgent. They existed in the background, subtle markers of life and movement, providing texture to the expansive calm. The interplay of sound, light, and shadow shaped the perception of space, allowing the observer to feel both the vastness of the landscape and the quiet intimacy of its smallest details. A lone rock catching moonlight, a small cluster of wildflowers shimmering softly, a fence line fading into shadow. The village, now a gentle memory behind, emitted only faint traces of light from a few remaining windows, their glow diffused by distance and the evening air. Lanterns that had guided footsteps along narrow streets now became mere pinpoints, gradually absorbed into the broader nocturnal landscape. Here, the watcher's attention could drift freely, tracing lines between moonlit ridges, between the silhouettes of hedgerows and distant farmhouses. Every step, whether imagined or observed from the quiet edge of a path, seemed cushioned by the softness of night, the earth beneath damp yet yielding, the air cool and steady. Shadows extended slowly, merging with the faint silver sheen of the moon across the land. Small hollows became pools of darker gray, gentle slopes caught brighter reflections, and subtle undulations created a rhythm to the visual landscape. Any movement, an animal quietly passing, the bending of a branch, a stray leaf carried on the wind, was absorbed into the continuous flow of the night, almost imperceptible, yet lending life to the stillness. The scene encouraged a calm wandering of attention, a quiet following of lines, contours, and light without expectation or demand. Near the edges of the village, where cultivated land gave way to wild growth, textures became more varied. Grasses lengthened into tufts and clusters, low shrubs cast gentle shadows, and the occasional tree reached upward, its leaves trembling in the night breeze. Light from the moon danced across these surfaces, catching silver highlights on bark and dew-laden leaves, forming a delicate, shifting mosaic that required only gentle observation. The open fields were an extension of the quiet streets before, yet here space and air expanded, the mind invited to drift without boundary, following the natural rhythm of landscape and light. Paths, softly pressed into the soil from years of passage, meandered between hedgerows, rolling knolls, and scattered stones. They led neither to a specific destination nor to urgency but offered a gentle invitation to meander. A lone fence post, silhouetted against the horizon, marked a subtle transition in land use, its presence lending a sense of order without intrusion. Each visual element contributed to a cohesive calm, every shadow and glint of moonlight reinforcing the continuity of night's embrace. The air carried faint scents of the countryside, moist earth, distant flowers, and the lingering warmth of fields recently touched by day. These aromas were subtle, blending seamlessly with the visual landscape to create a quiet, immersive experience. The gentle movements of night creatures, a mouse rustling, an owl gliding silently, added to the texture, their activity small and unhurried, harmonizing with the slow rhythm established by moonlight and the soft contours of the terrain. Along the faint pathways, dew reflected the pale light, forming tiny, glimmering pools that mirrored the sky. Every detail, from a blade of grass bending under its weight to the curve of a distant ridge, seemed softly magnified by the moon's tender glow. Observers could trace these forms with the eyes or the mind, moving seamlessly from one gentle highlight to the next, absorbing the serene breadth of the fields. Here, the village was a remembered warmth behind, and the open land invited complete release, the body and mind merging with the quiet of the night. The horizon itself carried a soft gradation of shadows, from the deeper darkness where the fields met the sky to the subtle shimmer of distant hills. The moonlight, steady yet soft, illuminated enough to observe textures and shapes, but never harshly. The landscape became a lullaby in light and shadow, each element balanced to foster calm attention and gentle mental wandering. Eyes could drift over distant tree lines, trace the curves of the earth, or linger on reflective surfaces in the grass, all without urgency, all under the slow passage of night. Moving further into the open fields, the visual perception expanded, the moonlight stretching across low rises and gentle dips. There was no need for movement, no requirement for focus, only the slow, continuous observation of form, texture, and light. Each element existed as part of a cohesive whole. The rolling terrain, scattered vegetation, faint traces of animal passage, and the overarching quiet of night. The mind could wander freely, tethered softly to the gentle rhythms of light and landscape, letting each detail fade gradually into the next. At the very edge of the fields, where the land met distant forested areas, shadows deepened yet softened under the lunar glow. Trees became silhouettes against the sky, their edges brushed with silver, and spaces between trunks formed quiet channels for imagined or fleeting movement. The gentle interplay of light and dark provided a canvas for restful attention, where the eyes could linger or drift without demand. The night here was vast yet intimate, a final expanse connecting village to open land, human presence to the broader rhythms of nature. Every texture, from the smoothness of stones embedded in soft earth to the delicate sway of tall grasses, was bathed in gentle silver. Small movements, whether of animals, wind, or shifting dew, were absorbed without urgency, contributing only to the continuous calming rhythm of the night. Observers could trace paths of light, shadow, and form as slowly as they wished, drifting alongside the contours of the land, allowing thought to soften, attention to relax, and awareness to merge with the serenity of moonlit fields. The experience was open, unhurried, and endlessly accommodating to rest, preparing the mind and body for the gentle transition into sleep. As the moon climbed higher, its glow stretched wider across the fields, the village now fully receded behind the observer, and the eye could roam over gentle rises, glimmering dew, and soft shadowed hollows. Every element, the curves of the land, the distant outline of trees, the faint shimmer on scattered stones, formed part of a continuous, immersive nocturnal scene. The quiet of the fields, uninterrupted by human noise, enveloped the landscape in a tender, expansive embrace. Mind and body could rest in this openness, following the slow, harmonious rhythm of light, shadow, and natural form, drifting towards stillness and gentle slumber, leaving behind all traces of urgency, expectation, or time. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts drift where they want to go. And allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.